What I'm about to tell you is a true story that has haunted historians for over 400 years. It's about 115 men, women, and children who simply disappeared. Not one body was ever found, not one piece of clothing, not one bone. They left behind only empty houses, scattered belongings, and a single cryptic word carved into a wooden post. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, and after you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll understand why it remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. But before we dive into this rabbit hole, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the algorithm seems to make stories like these disappear, just like the colonists we're about to discuss. Our story begins in 1587, during the height of European colonization efforts in the New World. England was desperate to establish a permanent foothold in North America, partly to compete with Spanish expansion, but also to find new sources of wealth and resources. Sir Walter Raleigh, one of Queen Elizabeth IV's most trusted courtiers, had been granted a charter to establish a colony somewhere along the coast of what we now call North Carolina. But here's where things get interesting, and this detail is crucial to understanding what happened later. Raleigh had actually tried this twice before, and both attempts had failed spectacularly. The first group of colonists had returned to England after less than a year, and the second group had simply vanished, a disturbing preview of what was to come. But Raleigh was nothing if not persistent. For his third attempt, he assembled a group of 115 colonists, including 17 women and 11 children. This wasn't going to be a temporary military outpost. These people were bringing their families. They were planning to build a life in the New World. The group was led by John White, an artist and mapmaker who had been to the region before. White was chosen specifically because of his previous experience and his relatively good relationships with some of the local Native American tribes. Now, here's a detail that makes this story even more heartbreaking. John White's own daughter, Eleanor, was among the colonists, and Eleanor was pregnant. The colonists departed England in May 1587, and after a treacherous 3-month journey across the Atlantic, they arrived at Roanoke Island in July. Almost immediately, things started going wrong. First, they discovered that the 15 men who had been left behind from the previous expedition were gone. Their fort was in ruins, and there were clear signs of violence. The only clue was a single skeleton, but they couldn't even determine if it was one of their missing countrymen or someone else entirely. Despite this ominous discovery, the colonists decided to stay. They began rebuilding the fort and establishing their settlement. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor White gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, who became the first English child born in the Americas. But the colonists were facing serious problems. Their supplies were running dangerously low, and relations with the local tribes were becoming increasingly tense. Some tribes were friendly, but others were openly hostile, particularly the Secotan and Aquascogok tribes who had been mistreated by previous English expeditions. By late August, it became clear that someone needed to return to England to bring back supplies and reinforcements. The colonists chose John White for this mission, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Think about this for a moment. John White had to make an impossible choice: stay with his daughter and newborn granddaughter and watch the colony potentially starve, or leave them behind to fetch help, not knowing if he'd ever see them again. White sailed for England on August 27, 1587. The plan was simple. He would gather supplies and reinforcements and return within a few months, certainly before winter set in. But fate had other plans. When White arrived in England, the country was preparing for war. The Spanish Armada was mobilizing, and Queen Elizabeth had issued orders that no ships could leave English waters. They were all needed for the defense of England. White was trapped. His daughter, his granddaughter, and 113 other colonists were stranded 3,000 miles away, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Can you imagine the agony? Every day that passed was another day his family was struggling to survive in the wilderness. The war with Spain dragged on for months. White tried everything. He appealed to Raleigh, to the Queen, to anyone who would listen. He even attempted to sail back on two small ships in 1588, but they were attacked by French privateers and forced to return to England. It wasn't until August 1590, 3 full years after he had left, that White was finally able to secure passage back to Roanoke. By this time, any supplies the colonists had would have been long gone. If they were still alive, it would be nothing short of miraculous. What White found when he finally returned to Roanoke Island is one of the most chilling discoveries in American history. The settlement was completely deserted. Not just empty, deserted. The houses had been dismantled in an orderly fashion. Personal belongings were scattered around, but they appeared to have been sorted through deliberately, as if someone had been deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The fort's perimeter had been reinforced with a high palisade, suggesting the colonists had been preparing for an attack or siege. But there were no signs of violence, no bodies, no bloodstains, no indication of a battle. It was as if 115 people had simply decided to walk away from their lives and vanish into the wilderness. But then White found something that has puzzled researchers for over 4 centuries. Carved into a wooden post at the entrance to the settlement was a single word, Croatoan. Nearby, carved into a tree, were the letters Crow. Now, before White had left 3 years earlier, he had arranged a code with the colonists. If they needed to leave the settlement for any reason, they were to carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were leaving under duress or because of an attack, they were to carve a cross above the message. There was no cross above Croatoan. So what did Croatoan mean? White knew immediately. Croatoan was the name of an island about 50 miles south of Roanoke, now known as Hatteras Island. It was inhabited by Native Americans who had been friendly to the English colonists. White was actually encouraged by this discovery. Maybe his daughter and granddaughter were alive and well, living with friendly natives on Croatoan Island. But here's where this story takes another tragic turn. White tried to sail to Croatoan Island to search for the colonists, but a massive storm hit the area. The weather was so severe that the anchor cables on his ship snapped, and they were blown far out to sea. The ship was damaged, supplies were running low, and the crew was threatening mutiny if they didn't return to England immediately. John White was forced to abandon his search. He never saw his daughter or granddaughter again. So what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Over the past 430 years, dozens of theories have been proposed, and the truth is, we still don't know for certain. Theory number 1. They went to Croatoan Island as the carving suggested, but something happened to them there. Maybe they were killed by hostile tribes, maybe they died of disease, maybe they were absorbed into the native population and their English identity was lost over time. In 1998, archaeologists did find some English artifacts on Hatteras Island, including a signet ring and some copper farthings that could have belonged to the colonists. But they never found definitive proof. Theory number 2. They were killed by hostile Native American tribes near Roanoke. Some historians point to reports from later English expeditions that claim to have heard stories from natives about killing white settlers, but again, no bodies were ever found. Theory number 3, and this one is particularly dark. They were victims of the Powhatan tribe's systematic elimination of English settlements. In 1607, 20 years after the Roanoke colony disappeared, Captain John Smith of the Jamestown colony reported that Chief Powhatan had bragged about destroying 2 English settlements and killing all the inhabitants. But here's theory number 4, and it's the one that keeps me awake at night. They tried to return to England on their own. Think about it. White had been gone for 3 years with no word. For all the colonists knew, England had forgotten about them entirely. Faced with dwindling supplies and increasing hostility from some native tribes, maybe they decided to build boats and attempt the 3,000-mile journey back to England. If this is what happened, they almost certainly died at sea. The Atlantic Ocean in the 16th century was a graveyard for even experienced sailors with well-built ships. A group of desperate colonists in makeshift boats would have had virtually no chance of survival. This would explain why no trace of them was ever found on land. They're not missing, they're at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But there's one more theory, and it's perhaps the most intriguing of all. In 2012, researchers examining a 16th century map drawn by John White himself made a startling discovery. Using advanced imaging techniques, they found symbols hidden under patches on the map, symbols marking two locations inland from Roanoke Island. One of these locations is about 50 miles west of Roanoke, near what is now the town of Edenton, North Carolina. Archaeological excavations at this site have uncovered European artifacts dating to the late 16th century, including pottery, tools, and what appears to be a piece of a rapier sword. Could the colonists have moved inland, trying to establish a new settlement away from the coast? Could some of them have survived and integrated with local Native American communities? This theory gained credibility in 2016 when DNA analysis of several Native American families in the region revealed European genetic markers that could date back to the late 16th century. But here's what makes this mystery even more haunting. We know Virginia Dare existed. We have baptismal records proving she was born on Roanoke Island on August 18, 1587. She was a real person, a baby girl who took her first breath in the New World and then vanished along with everyone else. What happened to her? Did she die as an infant from disease or starvation? Did she grow up among Native Americans, never knowing her true heritage? Did she live a full life, have children of her own, and pass down English genes that still exist in the populations of coastal North Carolina today? We may never know. John White spent the rest of his life tormented by guilt and uncertainty. He wrote in his journal, "I greatly joyed that I had safely found a certain token of their safe being at Croatoan, which is the place where Manteo was born, and the savages of the island are friends." But that joy was short-lived when he realized he might never reach them. White died sometime around 1593, never knowing what happened to his family. The lost colony of Roanoke remains one of America's oldest cold cases. Despite centuries of investigation, countless archaeological expeditions, and advances in forensic science, we still don't know what happened to those 115 people. Were they killed? Did they die of disease? Did they integrate with Native American tribes? Did they die trying to return to England? Are their descendants still living in North Carolina today, carrying genetic echoes of America's first missing persons case? The only thing we know for certain is that on a summer day in 1590, John White stared at that single word, Croatoan, carved into a wooden post, and realized that his daughter, his granddaughter, and 113 other souls had walked off the edge of the known world and into history's greatest mystery. And 430 years later, they're still missing. What do you think happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories that will keep you awake at night, wondering about the mysteries that surround us every day. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying disappearances are the ones where people simply vanish without a trace.